Good morning, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum to everyone, wherever you may be. I'm Asad Alam. I work at the World Bank, and I'm delighted to actually help moderate this special session at the ERF conference on poverty and wealth inequality in Arab states, focusing on measurement and forecasting issues. I'm particularly pleased to join the ERF Forum, an organization that I have been involved with over the years, on and off. I used to join also the conferences when I used to be based in Cairo. So it's great to see this and see the richness of the various sessions. This particular conversation on poverty and inequality measurement is of heightened relevance in the times that we live in, not only during the context of the COVID crisis, the pandemic, issues of poverty, and how do we actually measure that in a fast-changing world had become very important. And now with the Ukraine war and the implications on commodity prices and what it actually might do for incomes for the poor, and the distribution aspects of that becomes of even greater importance. So we have a fascinating panel here of people who have been doing some frontier work on looking at these issues. I'm particularly excited that we have a panel from the whole panel actually from UNESCO, who have been doing some work on that. But before I introduce the panel and get started, I wanted to share with you some organizational details for everyone. First of all, there is an Arabic translation also available for those who are interested. So please, you can switch to that Arabic simultaneous translation. Second, that the session is also being recorded, and it will be broadcast on the ERF YouTube channel. And third, that there will be a question and answer session after the presenters and the discussants have spoken. So if you want to have any question, please either raise your hand, or better still, put your question in the chat, and someone will try to help bring that to my attention so that we can actually have an organized conversation. So with that, let me actually introduce our panelists today. We have Dr. Khalid Abu Ismail, who is the Chief of the Economic Development and Poverty Section at UNESCO. He will start off with the first presentation on harmonized quasi-absolute poverty lines and present an integrated approach. He'll be followed by Hassan Hami, who is also a researcher at UNESCO, and his presentation will focus on economic growth, from economic growth to poverty reduction, forecasting the pass-throughs. And finally, the third panelist is Vladimir Lasny. He's an economic affairs officer also at UNESCO, and he will be talking about wealth distribution in the Arab region, the impact of COVID-19. So each of the presenters will speak for no more than 15 minutes. I'll try to make sure that we stick to the time discipline. And then we will turn over to our lead commentators, Dr. Mai Gadala, who is at Cairo University and at ERF, and Paul Magdisi, who's at the University of Ottawa and also associated with the ERF. So they will speak for 10 minutes each, and after which we will then open it to question and answers. So with that, let me actually start off and request Khalid Abu Ismail, who in addition to being at ESQA is of course also a policy affiliate at ERF. So welcome, Khalid, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Asad. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Again, it's a pleasure to be here at the ERF annual conference. And as you said, Dr. Asad, this is a very relevant topic for us to be discussing these days, especially with the impacts that we are seeing unfolding with the Ukraine crisis and the rising fuel and food prices, which will have their spillover effects, no doubt. Let me start by sharing my screen and see if... Okay, so this is, let me say, first of all, that there are two other authors who are with us in the three papers that we're about to present to you, the ASCO papers, Juni and Mohammed Bizri, who are not with us today. This work has been taking us for almost now more than a year or a year and a half. It is relatively technical work, but I'll try to make the presentation as non-technical as possible and allow for more of the policy implications. So with that, let me turn my slide. Okay, so first on the motivation for this work, we have the first of the three papers is essentially about the choice of the poverty line. And I'll explain later why this is important, because anywhere in the world really, but especially in the Arab region, your choice of the poverty line really gives you the poverty story. And in this particular paper, this first paper, we are interested in saying something about this poverty line, which poverty line methodology would give us an estimate that would reflect both the national specificities and yet allow for some degree of comparability across countries and across. This has been the real challenge for poverty reduction, ever since the work had started in more recent times, of course, with the World Bank and POV-CAL. But really, that is the essential question. And then once we resolve this issue, of course, then we have to go into, well, how do we then do our forecasting and even nowcasting of these results? And that's what Hassan will be talking about. And those two issues will then be complemented with the work that Vlad has been leading on wealth inequality in particular, because we can see that there is a direct connection between the growing inequalities that we see at the top of the distribution and about how to link that with the cost of poverty reduction. So again, just a quick overview of what is out there in terms of poverty, monometric poverty methodologies. Now, before I get in here, let me say that this is what ESCO has been doing on monometric poverty is relatively new. We have been working over the past maybe 10 years on multidimensional poverty, and that's something that is very important to begin with, to say that the relationship that we have between monometric poverty and multidimensional poverty is perhaps a subject for another discussion. But the importance here is that when a lot of the attention lately has been focused on multidimensional poverty measures, which include, in addition to income, issues related to deprivations in health, education, other aspects, and building on the capability approach. I mean, it doesn't negate the importance of monometric poverty, and especially for this region. That's the starting point that I would like to start with. So monometric poverty, usually you look at it in terms of one of two approaches. You're either looking at absolute measures of deprivation, and these are typically measured at the national level using national poverty lines that capture the specificities of a country. They can be typically based on some cost of basic needs, so, and it can be based on your caloric household specific conditions and take into account your demographics, your household needs, your the conditions of each household, and of course adjusting to local prices, etc. And that is very important, of course, when you design policies at the national level. You need to have this very country-specific approach. But then, of course, we face the question of cross-country comparisons, and here is where you want to adjust for the purchasing power of that, the poverty line, so that it measures the same thing across countries. It measures the same relative basket of goods and services. And what we call extreme poverty today is measured according to the $1.09 a day. It tries to do that. It tries to give us global poverty comparisons that more or less measure that minimum cost of basic needs. Now, there's another, of course, way to measure poverty, which is relative, and that is used more frequently in richer countries, in which case you determine some kind of threshold. In most cases, it's the half of, the median income. And then you say that, this is more appropriate reflection of poverty, and typically in high income countries. So each of these approaches, of course, has an advantage and a disadvantage. And the question that we're starting with here is, what are the challenges that we face when we tell the poverty story? And typically, the poverty global story, of course, has been reported as per the SDGs target of $1.90 a day, which, as I said, is essential reflection of the basic needs, especially in the poorest countries. But does it really measure extreme poverty in all countries? And of course, we're all aware of the limitations of that, especially if you've been involved in the literature and read the famous Atkinson report. And we all knew, including the World Bank team, we all knew of the limitations of that approach. And there are limitations for various reasons, including the ability of the PPPs to reflect this purchasing power assumption, the fixed purchasing power assumption across time and space. I mean, for example, if you take a look at Egypt and you use the same methodology that is used to determine the national poverty lines in the poorest countries, and that's how the World Bank arrived at the $1.09 a day, you'll find that using the same approach, the value of the national poverty line is way higher. It's around 3.5 in 2011 PPPs. So here's the challenge. We want to reach a poverty line that allows for a certain degree of comparability, yet at the same time retains the specificity of each country having its national specifics in terms of the poverty challenge. As a response to this, the World Bank proposed a very interesting way to calculate global poverty measures, and in the form of the societal poverty line, which is basically a very nice idea that you have both aspects. You have the absolute aspect. So basically, you will retain this minimum of $1.09 a day. But if your income is the value of the poverty line is higher than that, you basically look at half of the median. So you can think of this as a way to combine between the absolute and the relative measures in one way to estimate a country-specific poverty line. And of course, because it has a relative component, it will change across time and space. Our idea builds on this, the ability to have both notions of relative and absolute aspects in the same poverty line. But let's first look at the stylized facts that are relevant, especially for the MENA and the Arab region, because that's the focus of our discussion today. What's very interesting about the MENA region or the Arab region, and here the results are for the MENA region, is that the story really differs depending on which poverty line estimate you use. So for all poverty lines before $5.50 a day, the region is lower in terms of poverty incidence than the global average. But then starting after the 5.5 line, it starts to become a poorer region. Is that the case with any other region? No. I mean, in many cases, you will see South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa being consistently poorer than the global average, regardless of the choice of the poverty line. And Latin America and Europe and Central Asia being consistently below that global average. So especially for the Arab region, this is important, the methodology that we adopt. And of course, the other issue, the other stylized facts that we need to take into account for the Arab region is that there's a huge variation between countries. And the other issue, of course, is that starting from 2010 and with the conflict shocks that have affected some countries, Syria and Yemen specifically, you really have a very different poverty story in those two countries than the one that you have before. Also, interestingly, if you use the $1.09, you will get a rising trend, but if you use the 3.2 a day, you will find a reversal in the trend depending on the data that we have from PovCal. So these are the stylized facts that we have for the region. Now let me jump to our data and methodology. And basically, as I said, we want to retain that country specificity. And we think that by starting at looking at these national poverty lines, there's a wealth of information that we can utilize. So what you have in those scatter plots is the relationship between the national poverty lines reported by the statistical agencies and by PovCal in 2011 PPPs plotted against your mean income expenditure per day. And as you can see here, there is a relatively clear relationship. Basically the higher the income per capita per day, the higher the value of this national poverty line. The difference between two scatter plots is that on the right-hand side, we've added the ones for the high-income countries, which are, as I said, mainly based on relative poverty line methodology estimations. But this is the basis here. This is the basis that we want to explore further. And we want to see how can we develop this? We know that obviously the level of income is one of the main determinants of this poverty line, but are there other factors that affect it if we want to estimate an appropriate poverty line for the country? And according to our basic regression, we've added control variables that we think are also important to take into account. For example, the size of the country. Why is that important? Because we think that with larger countries, there comes certain degrees of economies of scale with the larger share, particularly of urban populations, that might affect the value of the poverty line. So these are the kinds of insights that we want to bring to the table. Now, did we try many specifications that included, for example, the level of inequality, which theoretically makes sense, but empirically, it doesn't. So that's why we've excluded it from this particular regression. But the other insight that we have here, which is similar to the World Bank, by fixing a global minimum, a plateau of 1.9, we're also thinking that, and it's a very interesting question, but I think it's the real intellectual contribution of our work. Does it also make sense to have this relationship, the relative relationship, go on forever? Or is it valid to say that at a certain level of income per capita, the poverty line should be constant? So, and that's another, I think, insight that we bring to the table. So this insight is what we also bring to the table here. So we control for these other factors and we bring this maximum plateau to the discussion.
Khalid, just yes. Sorry to interrupt. You have 2 more minutes unless you...
Oh, 2 more minutes. Then, okay, here's a multivariate regression, a second approach with fixed effects, country effects. So this is a stepwise regression. I'll just skip over to the non-parametric approach, which I was going to tell Hassan to explain in a minute, but since I don't have a minute, I'll skip over that as well. I'll just go straight to the results. This is the results of our first regression, which is your standard multivariate regression plotted against the World Bank's societal poverty line. As you can see here, you have a very nice fit, with the exception that, the maximum poverty line we have in our model is capped at $20 a day. So we don't think that anybody who earns $20 a day anywhere in the world should be labeled as poor. Now, you might dispute that, but that's, again, our intellectual contribution. And as we say that 1.9 is the base low poverty line for extreme poverty, anybody who earns more than $20 in PPP anywhere in the world should not be labeled as poor. For the 2 other models, you have also a really good fit, as you can see here. So I'm not going to go too much into the details, but there are some outliers, especially as we get into higher values of poverty lines. And this is for the non-parametric random forest approach. Also a very nice fit, but with some outliers at the top. The box plot is a really nice way to tell the story of the median estimates of the poverty lines. And the nice thing that we see as from the results is that all of our median estimated poverty lines are within the same range. So that adds a certain layer of robustness to our results. It gives us confidence that what we're doing makes sense. But there is a large regional disparity, and that's because of the diversity that you see, especially in regions like East Asia and Europe and Central Asia, to a lesser extent in Arab region. Not so much in Sub-Saharan Africa, because most of the countries have similarities, South Asia, and of course, North America. When you look at it by income groups, you also see this very clearly, that the higher the income, the higher the dispersion between our estimated poverty lines. So these are basically the results. Now we go to the main result, which I want to maybe stop for a few seconds and look at. According to most models, the Arab region is the second highest in terms of poverty compared to other regions. And that's a very important difference then when you look at, for example, the standard 1-9 approach. So again, this gives you a different narrative. In fact, if you use a model with the fixed effects, our region is even poorer than Sub-Saharan Africa. It's only with the standard multivariate regression that you get a significantly higher rate in Latin America, which we're curious about and we can talk about later. So, concluding remarks, the questions that I think are interesting for us to focus on. Which one of these models makes sense for us to explore? And what next? So the question of which model is more appropriate, of course, I think that our answer to this is clear from my presentation, that the multivariate regression with introducing this maximum plateau, I think intellectually makes sense. But is that also the opinion of the discussants? So I'd be curious to know. What next? We're thinking that if we have this appropriate poverty line for global comparisons, we can use it in order to estimate the relevant cost of poverty reduction, the cost of filling in the gap, and then relate that to wealth inequality at the top, which is what my colleague Vladimir will talk about in a few minutes. Let me stop here, hand it over to my colleague Hassan to talk about, now that we have the poverty line, how do we fill in the gaps in terms of updating our poverty data with forecasts and nowcasting results. I'll stop sharing and hand it over to you, Hassan.
Thanks, Dr. Khalid. Hassan, over to you.
This is a collective work, as Dr. Khalid mentioned, and I'll be presenting the presentation on pass-throughs. So it is entitled From Economy-Wide Growth to Household Poverty Reduction, Pass-Throughs and Forecasting. This is a main outline of the presentation. And here I will present a small definition to set the stage. So as we all know, the national accounts are defined as a measure of macroeconomic categories and are essentially used to measure economic activity at the country level. National Income Household Survey, on the other side, collects information about diverse features related to household living conditions with objectives to study the living standards of individuals. So, and as we know it, to calculate poverty, 3 important measures are needed: poverty line, mean income, and its observed distribution. National account estimates and projections are available every year, while surveys are not conducted every year and appear on the scene every once in a while. So, is there a relationship? Which measure is more reliable for the poverty measurement? Our assumption is that survey and national accounts are not competing estimates for the mean income. Methods to estimate the national account is continuously improving, and so is the survey side. Also, and since both can be used to compute the mean income at the national level, what are the possible reasons for non-similarity? I will list a few, and the others are also listed in the paper that is shared beforehand. So national accounts and survey data are collected differently and at different levels. Different prices levels are used. Surveys do not seem to capture many new and emerging products, such as electronics, plastics, and etc. Sudden economic shocks that are not captured in survey mean income because it's not done frequently, and so forth. So if the aim is to continuously monitor poverty, and in the absence of high year-on-year frequency of surveys, what needs to be done? This presentation focuses on the growth story only, Therefore, the question becomes, is that assuming some assumption on the income distribution, what is the mean level of income in a country for a certain year where no survey data is observed? The possible answers are option A, use the only observed country level mean income to that year, which is the national account because it's done on a yearly basis. Option B, use option A, but only for regional and global aggregate analysis, and don't go into the country-specific analysis. Then the next question becomes, what if we don't want to use the national account mean income? What do we do? This goes to option C, reconciliation of micro and macro data and do some simulations. Or option D, and the one we have adopted, is to use the national accounts observed year on year mean income growth to now cast the closest observed survey data. So if adopted, the question is it fair to assume a one-to-one relationship between growth in surveys and growth in national accounts? If not, how to measure this relationship? Also, if the methodology used to measure the deviation between survey mean and national account mean does a good job of noticing patterns, does it measure the time effect and time trends? Does it take that effect into account? Now, then I will present the challenges. How can it be measured? Measurement and methodologic challenges. At which level? Country, regional, or global, or all? Any other level? Subgroup perhaps? Going away from geographic? If so, how should we define the subgroups? Economic attribute perhaps? Any remaining challenges post-computations? Now presenting the data. So the sample of country year observation in this study is limited to only the most recent survey years per country in a period that spans from 1990 to 2019. For countries with abundant number of surveys in that period, only the latest ones are chosen. This data set is the same that we have used also in the poverty line analysis. As you can see on the left side, we have categorical variables, and on the right side, we have numerical variables. The categorical, we have some welfare measurements. Most of the developed countries like Europe, or North America rely more on income, and less developed country rely more on consumption surveys. Poverty lines also, as Khaled mentioned, most of the developed countries such as Europe and North America do their poverty line computation based on a relative basis and the remaining on absolute and so forth. And the numerical, I will just cite a few, like the head count. We have the minimum is 0.8% of the people are poor, and we have the median and the mean. We have the Ginies, we have the population. As you can see, the maximum is not above 1 billion, which is China and India, but here we are taking China rural and China urban. So 2 observations and so forth. Now I'll just go back to this slide and say that the pass-through is calculated according to this formula here, which means that the annualized growth in surveys over the annualized growth in PCE over a spell. What is the definition of spell? It's formed by 2 consecutive survey years, okay? And same thing we're doing for the denominator. Which national account we are taking? We are taking the PCE because conceptually, it is the closest to economic activity typically captured in household surveys. Other people use GDP and other people use a mix of both. Going back to the data, and for countries with 3 points in time, we can have 2 growth period spells, okay? Oldest and latest. For countries with only 1 survey observation, there will be no growth, like Syria, for example. And for countries with only 2 observed surveys, only 1 spell growth is analyzed. The aim is to find the proportion of growth observed in national accounts that is passed through to growth and household surveys, okay? And then this is the descriptive stats we have for T oldest and T latest. As you can see, we have a minimum spell length for the oldest of 1 year and a maximum spell length for the latest observation of 16. Now we go into the facts. This is the results of the descriptive results. So as we can see, the pass-through ratios differ from region to region and also from period to period. For developing and low-income regions, the ratio tend to be lower, regardless of which time style we take, whether latest or oldest. While other regions score between 0.8 and 1.2, the Arab region and Sub-Saharan consistently score below 0.4. These 2 regions share common characteristics for the covariates and income attributes that I have mentioned before, like low to medium poverty headcount ratio, poverty line, and mean and all medium incomes, and inequality as well, high inequality. The orange line or the violet line that you can see is the global pass-through average for the latest spell, the weighted mean. Also here, we can see that the latest and earliest spell exhibit similar pass-through ratio for most regions, on the exception of East Asia, South Asia, and North America shows a remarkable change from a spell to a spell. The reason is that for each of these regions, one country at least has a large share of regional population. And since we are weighting by population, a small change in one will affect a lot the pass-through. So, for example, slight change in PCE growth or in survey mean income growth from one spell to another for countries like China, India, Indonesia, or the United States may lead to significant changes. Example, the 1.83 population weighted regional that you can see over here in the East Asia pass-through rate for East Asia using the latest spell is caused by an observed pass-through value of 10 for Indonesia, associated with a large percentage share growth in mean income and a reported small change in PCE, which is the denominator. This will make the coefficient much higher. Similarly, India and other countries. Now we move into the methodology that we have adopted, and moving away from the descriptive analysis, we shall do some modeling. So two main dimensions, regression and another clustering before doing again the regression. So regressing all the data and then clustering plus regression. So so we use first as we see in both equations to the left, regression separately for each of the 7 world regions according to the UN classification. And as an alternative model that is more robust to small sample size of small regions, we also regress the ratio of survey mean to PCE on regional dummy variables. The data set will be larger. Now, of course, this model could be augmented by including more variables, but this is not the point. Then we have the 2 clustering techniques that we have used before applying the regression. The first one is the partitioning around medoids. This method entails clustering data using a non-supervised machine learning method. The aim of the clustering is to minimize the distance between observation in a certain subgroup around a specific observation, which is the medoid, and maximize the distance between clusters. Okay, so minimize within cluster and maximize between cluster. In the previous model, the regression, the subgroup were delineated by geographic regions, while here they are defined as by economic proximity among observations. The technique starts by identifying the number of clusters to partition the data. Then multiple metrics are available to select the optimal number. One option that we have performed and used involves the silhouette method. I will not go much into the details. And then because of the variety of variables used, including numerical and categorical variables, the next thing is to decide on the distance, how to measure it, Euclidean or Gower distance. So since we have 2 types of data, the Gower distance will be included. After selecting the distance criteria and the number of clusters, the algorithm assigns every observation to a cluster percentage by its medoid. So now how to assign this medoid. And then finally, to test the performance and robustness of the machine learning method, the PAM, and to check how sensitive the results are, we have done cross-validation. And these are all described in the paper. The third method, and the second clustering technique, it's the model-based recursive partitioning. So in keeping with the same logic of data partitioning and estimating regression coefficient for the previous model, we apply this new model, which relies on statistical test. And the test aims at finding if the difference between both subset regression coefficient is significant or not. So this is based on statistical test. If the test static p-value is less than 5% significance level that we have attributed, this means that the difference between the 2 data split subset is significant. And therefore, partition has to be performed a second time. We do it so forth until the model is stable. So 2 parameters are used in such a model, and these are the p-value significant level and the minimum number of observation allowed per node, which is set at 20. These are the hyperparameters for this clustering technique. Then we go. Sorry,
Hassan, you also have 2 minutes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So starting by the results for the regression, here we can see in the line 2 and line 3. that different regions are shown to have different pass-through regardless of the model used. The Arab and sub-Saharan regions have the lowest pass-throughs. Countries in the same region are assigned the same regional pass-through. But this is clearly restrictive in the case of some countries, and this we will see in the second set of results, which is the clustering, the PAM, and the story becomes different. There is the result that you see in front of you and indicate that the pass-through rates vary not across geographic regions, but across other demographic and economic divides, which is the covariate attributes that we have discussed before. And countries with high poverty headcounts tend to have lower pass-throughs. And poverty headcount seems to be the main factor affecting these splits. Also for other cluster, I don't have time to explain them, but it is well explained in the paper as well. And here we can see the dendrogram for the clustering process of the PAM model. Okay, and same logic as the PAM model. Also, it is mainly determined by the economic attributes. For countries with low poverty headcount, the Gini index and the population size separate observation into subgroups. And this is clearly seen at deeper level. Here you can see the regional effect at the third layer and the population at the third layer, but not at the first layer as the regression does. It only focuses region. This is the interesting result. So, analysis and concluding remarks. Pass-through rates do not appear to be clustered by geographic region per se, but by economic and demographic divides, forming distinct subgroups. This does not mean the regional clustering is inappropriate, only it becomes important at deeper layers, as I have showed you here. Okay. Developed countries with low poverty rate have high pass-through ratios. Other factors such as population density, Gini, among others, become relevant at deeper level. Finally, with the policy implication, here you can see the isoplots, which show the combination of inequality changes and growth changes resulting in the same level of poverty headcounts. Flatness of the curve, which you can see on the plot to the left, implies that the relative importance of growth in affecting poverty reduction policies is much higher. So for example, for a country like Afghanistan 2019, if I need to change inequality and move from a poverty rate of 40% to a poverty rate of 30%, it might take it might take a large change of Gini in order to move from the blue color here to the more lighter blue color. However, if I jump only a bit on the y-axis, and which is the growth, then I can switch from a poverty nature 40% to poverty of 30%. And this is the growth effect. While if we move to the right-hand side, you can see that the inequality plays a bigger role from a policy perspective. Okay, and here we can see that of all countries that have lowest pass-through ratios, which is here cluster 1, that all countries that are clustered and that have a pass-through rates of 0.3, and before we apply the pass-through, 56%, the policy recommendation for 56% of this country is to focus on the mean income in order to reduce poverty more efficiently than focusing on inequality. However, if we apply the pass-through, the story becomes inverts, and then you have to focus on inequality. And this is the importance of such pass-through being taken into account. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Hassan, and thanks for emphasizing that high rates of inequality make it more difficult for the transmission from growth to poverty reduction, which I guess is your bottom line there. Thanks. Let me ask the third presenter then, Vlad, for you to come in and to elaborate further, I guess, on this theme.
Here we go. I hope you can hear me and see my PowerPoint presentation. Okay.
Yeah, yes. You may want to switch to presentation mode if you can, please.
Good idea.
Your slides so that we have it on the full screen.
Here we go.
Lovely, thanks.
Please interrupt me anytime if I should change the volume or visuals so that it's clear for everyone.
It's
good. So the connection between this last paper and the previous two papers we heard about is a bit weaker, but I guess the connection is that we know, or we've estimated some poverty poverty differences across countries and poverty trends going to year 2030. And now we need to find some financing to cover those poverty gaps. And one idea that ESQA has been, and our team in particular, has been pursuing is using some of the wealth in the private sector, not relying on the existing fiscal space or on international donors, just looking at the private sector. How much of resources are there and could be made available through taxation or voluntarily through some solidarity funds to fill the gaps. And of course, the data on the distribution of wealth and concentration of wealth at the top is non-existent. So in this study, we are doing a little bit of mathematical gymnastics to try to at least get the order of the size of wealth concentration in the region. We don't have any micro data from household surveys because most of financial assets are not covered by these and they would not be measured accurately in surveys. So one source of aggregate wealth data that we have consistently across countries and over time is the annual wealth reports by Credit Suisse. These data are not without limitations, but we try to use them in innovative ways, and we check some, we try to find some alternative estimates of the distribution of wealth to be able to say something about wealth in the region. So the limited amount of data available from these wealth reports is several statistics on wealth distribution in each country in each year since year 2000 all the way to year 2020 right now. And our ongoing work will be to project these values going forward to year 2030. The statistics that we have at our disposal are mean net personal wealth per adult citizen in each country. We have some measure of distribution, either the Gini index of inequality of this net wealth in the country, and or we have a median, so we can compare how far are the mean from the median wealth in a country to say something about the width of the wealth distribution in each country. And we also know the population size, or the number of adults to which this wealth information applies to. So we can estimate not just, let's say, wealth shares across different economic groups, but also the amount of wealth across economic groups and in the country overall. So now my favorite slide in this presentation is, well, how do we do this? We have only, let's say, 2 pieces of information per country and per year. And we want to blow up the information to estimate a full, smooth wealth distribution in the country. In previous studies, various statistical distribution functions have been suggested. There is growing literature on that, and but some parametric forms to estimate this are quite complicated. So on this slide, I show you that there are some 1 parameter, 2 parameter, 3 parameter, or 5 parameter, or even higher parametric shapes of distributions that have been proposed to model wealth. We have only 2 statistics. So we are restricted to using either 1 parametric equations or 2 parametric equations to estimate the full smooth distribution. So in the following analysis, following slides, I will be showing you estimates for the log normal distribution here. In this slide, it's this ln here. But I want to show that this is not the only way to model wealth distributions. This slide corresponds to the generalized beta family of statistical distribution functions, which have been successful at modeling the distributions of income, consumption, wealth, and other economic variables. But simply, we don't have enough, we don't have microdata, we don't have group data. We only have 2 statistics per country, so we are restricted to using something like, I've circled some Pareto, generalized Pareto type 2 distribution, log normal, and we cannot, even though there are some other popular and well-fitting distribution functions, we just don't have the input to try to estimate them. Okay, so anyway, we're starting with a log normal parameterization of the wealth distribution, and we will try additional functions and try to compare which model seems to work best. Okay, so now the literature on estimating wealth distributions is rather narrow, and there's not a large number of studies on that. So far, we've seen studies using log normal distribution, like we were doing here, or some kind of combination of log normal distribution for bottom wealth and Pareto distribution for top wealth. Here we chose to go very conservatively. We use the log normal distribution as a very conservative, very transparent, very elegant distribution that can be summarized using very simple equations that are very clear to present. Actually, I'm presenting all the equations on this slide. So basically, the different log normal distributions might look like this, depending on the 2 parameters, something like scale, affecting how high is the average wealth in the distribution, and the shape parameter, affecting how skewed to the left the distribution is. And the way we want to estimate it, we're actually interested in the inverse distribution function, which means if we look at individuals in the entire population, from the poorest person to the richest person, we want to figure out, we want to estimate the level of wealth for that person. So if we start with a person at the bottom percentile or the top percentile, we want to know from this inverse distribution function which level of wealth is associated with these population percentiles. And that's exactly what we get here. If we use information on mean wealth and the Gini coefficient, these are, we can calculate from this mean wealth, we estimate the mean value for the log normal distribution function. If we're using the Gini, we can estimate this standard deviation component for the log normal distribution function, and then plugging in the percentile of the population, first percentile or the 99th percentile. This equation will give us the level of wealth associated with those percentiles. Alternatively, actually, we have a longer time trend of information on median. So it turns out to be even simpler to use mean wealth and median wealth, where we get all the statistics needed. With these 2 pieces of information, we can estimate the levels of wealth associated with each percentile of a population in the population. As an example, if we do this for Egypt for the year 2020, the end of year 2020, so it's the end of the first year of the pandemic, and we use the average and the median value of wealth in Egypt, we get this shape of the, I'm losing my mouse here, mouse cursor. We get a Lorentz curve of wealth looking like this. It shows kind of a median, not very extreme level of inequality in wealth. We can also estimate this distribution function, which shows that a bulk of the Egyptian population is at the bottom, between 0 and say $5,000 of wealth, which is not much wealth at all. And then the distribution becomes really long, going to hundreds of thousands or millions, but we have very few individuals up there. Okay, so we get this very clear shape of wealth distribution in each country in the region. And the added advantage of estimating these full smooth distribution functions is that we can combine the information now to get the regional distribution of wealth. This will not be exactly log normal, but it's a sum of log normal distributions from Egypt, from Lebanon, and other regional countries. Okay. So showing just quickly the distribution of wealth for the region in the year 2020. We can distinguish the middle income group of Arab countries, the GCC countries, and the least developed countries and conflict affected countries. And we see that there are huge differences in the wealth distributions between these three groups of countries, especially I think it becomes clear if we look at the Lorenz curve, that the middle income countries have the highest Lorenz curve, meaning the least degree of inequality there. By contrast, if we look at the Gulf Cooperation Council countries and the least developed countries, they show much more inequality, but they also show different trend of inequality between them. In the GCC countries, the interpretation of this shape of the Lorenz curve is that there are not that many very wealth poor people, but the wealth grows across individuals very fast until it reaches super rich individuals. In the least developed countries, we have a slightly different pattern. We see we have very many individuals who have a very low wealth, and suddenly the Lorenz curve becomes very steep, meaning that the majority of individuals have very low wealth, and then there is a very small group of individuals suddenly skyrocketing and having much higher wealth. So a different pattern of inequality between middle income, high income, and low income countries. Okay, comparing the years 2019. So I think this is for the middle of the year 2019, and again, the end of year 2020. Again, we see clear differences in the regional distribution of wealth. We can see that the distributions become much more, much steeper and much more skewed. So it reflects, as I will show in some of the results, that the level of inequality grew significantly according to these estimates from before the pandemic and 1 year after the start of the pandemic. And this is seen at both extremes. Here I am capping the graphs at something like $10,000. Otherwise, the lines would just become horizontal and we wouldn't be able to see any differences. But basically, the differences between 2019 and 2020 we can see them at both ends of the wealth distribution. Very different things happened to the wealth poor in the region and to the wealth rich. Okay, I'm probably running out of time. No?
Yes, 1 more minute left.
One last minute. So let me jump to just a description in words of the key results. Let me quickly read them. So the region has seen many crises in recent years, especially since 2019. And what we see between 2019 and 2020 is that the Arab region's economic elites have tightened their grip on the region's assets, both in terms of their share relative to the poor group and middle wealth group, and in absolute value. So the concentration of wealth has grown. And so going back to our poverty projections, we could say that the region has greater reserves that it could tap on to fund poverty reduction efforts. Most economic groups saw their holdings eroded. So the bottom 50% of the population, the median, which is a typical citizen, or even the average, has seen their wealth going relatively down. But at the high end of the wealth distribution, individuals have been doing well and breaking through the 1 million wealth mark or higher wealth marks. Let me, so as I said, the trend between 2019 and 2020 has been particularly unequalizing in the region. And as a result, 1/3 of the 20 most unequal countries today are Arab countries. Okay, we see different patterns in the middle income, GCC, and least developed and conflict affected countries, where especially in the GCC and the least developed countries, inequality of wealth shot up. Finally, and at this point, I will ask Khalid to step in if he wants to make policy statements. But let me just show a few time trends since year 2000 to year 2020. We can estimate the level of wealth. So in this graph, we show what has been going on to the bulk of wealth worldwide in the region and across the 3 Arab subregions. What has happened to the level of wealth held by per capita, per adult. We see some differences. Worldwide, average wealth has been growing systematically upward. In the region, it's not so much. There have been periods of a reduction, and especially in the least developed countries, we see a lot of fluctuation. Wealth growing relatively fast until 2009, then declining. And by the year 2018, citizens of least developed countries had less wealth in nominal terms than in year 2000. So huge erosion of wealth there. Same trend for the median or typical wealth holdings of Arab citizens. And talking about inequality, we can also estimate trends on, and we see that the trends of wealth inequality have been different in the region than worldwide. Especially you can see between the year 2019 and 2020, everywhere worldwide, but especially in the region, we see an increase in wealth inequality and wealth concentration among the top 1% of the population. Let me stop right here. Khalid?
Thanks.
No, I don't think I'll come in at this stage, Vlad, because we're running out of time. Maybe later during my final remarks. Yep. So over to you, Asad.
Thanks, Vlad. I think your bottom line of the increase of wealth inequality over the last 2 years is something that resonates in other countries also, including in the advanced countries, the data that I have seen. Thanks very much for these very interesting presentations. Let me actually bring in our discussants and see what they have to say about your presentations. Let me first invite Dr. May Gadala to make her remarks. Dr. May.
Thank you, Dr. Asad, and thank you for the presenters for the very, I'm gonna share my screen, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, let me first thank you, Dr. Asad, and thank the presenters for their valuable effort and work. I really enjoyed reading the 3 papers, especially the technical part of the 3 papers. So I'm just, I mean, the papers, because of the good work that has been done, raised many questions for me, and I would like to share these questions with the presenters. Actually, I'm gonna start with the last paper, and let me say this, if I understand the idea correctly. The main idea is to impute the wealth distribution within each country using the 2 parameters log normal distribution function, and then aggregate the national distribution for all the Arab regions. And the presenter actually mentioned that the Arab region was disaggregated to subgroups, reflecting whether they are least developed or the Gulf countries or the medium developed countries. And the parameters, actually they used parameters, they were estimates from the Swiss data book, I think. So I have some of the questions here. Let me start with the data source. The Swiss credit data, I assume they are estimates. When I looked at these data, they were estimated using regression. So I was wondering, sorry here, let me minimize this. Okay. If the data was based, or the estimates were based on poor data and poor quality data, given that some of the least developed countries don't have highly quality data, and the Gulf countries, sometimes they don't have data at all. So it will be much appreciated if the paper has a section about the data itself and how the Swiss data was estimated and the variables used in this estimation. And if the regression techniques were used for the estimations, they are not observed values, I wonder how the authors can put this into consideration in the analysis itself. This is the second point I'm asking. And for the imputed distributions, I believe the authors, they try to impute like a synthetic distribution for the within country wealth. I wonder if there can, I mean, given that these are estimates, if they can add confidence interval for the distributions and for the Lorenz curve. That would be good in order to see, I mean, to put into consideration the marginal error. Another point that was mentioned in the paper when comparing the growth that happened in some of the sub-regions, it would be good if the authors can add tests for these numbers, because I cannot just say that it grew with 1.5% and so on without testing whether this was a significant growth or not. Another point that I would like to ask the authors for the graphs actually that were presented in figure 5 and figure 6. There was an increase in the Gini coefficient in the top 1% wealth share before the 2010, and that this growth actually disappeared after 2010. Especially in the Gulf countries. I wonder whether this is related to the estimated parameters that were used in imputing the distribution or not. Because I believe before 2010, the median was used, while after 2010, the Gini coefficient was used. If not, if there is a clear explanation for the drop that happened in the Gini coefficient after 2010, and the top one wealth share that happened at the same periods, because it was, I mean, high values and then it dropped suddenly in 2010. Another thing that I would like to have or to read an explanation for it, the drop that happened in 2019. Dr. Vladimir, I believe he mentioned that, but I didn't understand why this drop happened in 2019, and if there is a way to explain this change. One more thing, actually, when we look at the graphs, they are not mentioned in the presentation, but they are mentioned in the paper. It was the Arab region graph was affected or dominated by the Gulf countries graph. I wonder why. I mean, if there's clear explanation for this or not, given that the Gulf countries barely have data. So if there's an explanation for this as well, Yani. Another thing, it would be much appreciated, because I got a little bit confused for some of the figures, whether they are estimated by the authors or these are data from the Credit Suisse data book. So it will be appreciated if the source was written underneath the figures. Finally, for this paper, I mean, I really enjoyed it, and it kept raising more opening points to be done maybe in the future. One of these actually, instead of using the log normal, is using a mixture model that can capture the extreme values and the tail more than this. So it would be, I mean, great in the future if the authors can, or I mean, another point out, or other researchers actually do this point and apply other models rather than the log normal distribution. Okay, thank you. So for the second paper, I believe the idea was to have a discount factor and apply to macroeconomic growth forecasts in the national accounts. It's the private consumption PCE. And the main purpose is driving the corresponding growth in the mean per capita expenditure. So the main idea is to estimate this discount factor, or as it was called pass-through, using linear regression of pooled panel data, using the two variables, annualized growth of survey-based mean income between 2 time points, and using annualized growth in the private consumption expenditure over the same period. Another technique that was applied is the cluster analysis in addition to the linear regression, but the cluster analysis was applied first, and after clustering or grouping the observations, then the authors used the linear regression within each cluster. Okay, my first question actually, why it was mentioned, this paper actually in the following paper, that the time points were restricted to 3 time points in order to have near balanced panel data. And my question is, since we're using pooled panel regression, why do we need to restrict the number of the time points to only 3? Why not using all the time points that were available in the data that you have? This is one thing. Another thing, as we know, again, that least developed countries are more likely to have highly qualified, data of high quality. So I wonder if this will affect the result in a way that the missing data are coming from least developed countries, and again, some of the Gulf countries, and how this may affect the results. Maybe a footnote about it, that would be great. Another point that usually, I think this is in this paper and the following one as well, a point of disagreement between statisticians and economists regarding the regression. And I believe the regression that was used is multivariable or multiple regression. It's not multivariate regression. I know the most economists mention this as the multivariate, but I think it's multiple or multivariable regression. Another point, again,
Dr. Mai, sorry to interrupt. I think you'll have to wrap up soon.
Okay. Okay. It's again about the grouping the countries. I have a question about grouping the countries here. I really like the grouping that happened in the previous paper in least developed and medium developed countries. So I wonder if this can be again used in this paper and the following one as well. Maybe more elaboration about the interpretation of the pass-through values in the paper. It would be great if the standard errors were reported, and I wonder, is the ratio of the survey mean to the PCE roughly constant over time or not? Is it appropriate to assume this? Can this be discussed in the paper? And the following, the last one, it's mainly about imputing international comparable poverty lines, net of the country-specific data shocks using 3 techniques: multiple regression, using pooled panel data, fixed effect regression, and random forest approach. And the dependent variable used is the national poverty line. And actually, I believe it was a very interesting thing that the variables used for this model are actually very good predictors. And the high values of R square or adjusted R square confirm that the country-specific used variables can be used to predict the national poverty line. So this is in itself it's a great conclusion that these predictors can be used. But I want to again highlight the fact about the unbalanced panel data, again, why it's used. And one more thing actually about the interpretation of the intercept in case of selecting dummy variables and the interaction terms of dummy variables. The authors have to be a little bit careful about this selection and the stepwise used in selecting these variables. Because I mean, you cannot add one and delete another, because in this case, the intercept interpretation may differ. And again, it's the grouping issue, since the variation within the regions is very high, especially in the Arab region, while reporting the results at the regional level and not the country level. It will be very helpful to have it and useful. And finally, if the authors can add like a paragraph, and I believe Dr. Khalid was asking about which better model can be used. So they need to compare between the random forest versus the linear regression in this case. But I believe the linear regression actually, it gave very good results. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Asa. Thank you for
Thanks, Dr. Mai. So I think we are indeed very short on time. So over to you, Dr. Paul McDeasy, 10 minutes, please.
Hello, everyone. Let me share. I prepared a few slides. I need this in order to structure my comments. So can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay. So I will be discussing, not in details, the paper, but my intention here is to give some thought on future direction or a future paper that the others can do. So there was essentially 3 papers. The first one was detailed analysis of the choice of the poverty line, and the 2 other one was what should we do when surveys are not available. So I will split my comments in 2, focusing on the first one, first presentation first, and then the 2 others. I would like to make some comments on this. So in the first presentation, the authors have explored different methods in estimating and choosing the poverty line, and they also analyze the sensitivity of the poverty estimate based on the different analytical choice. One of the poverty line that they've presented and that I like is the Joliffe and Pritz societal poverty line. And the reason is that they have a mix of absolute and relative concepts within the same poverty line. And I think that poverty is an absolute concept, but it's an absolute concept in terms of capabilities to function in a society. And if you want to translate this from the space of capability to the space of income, then there should be some relative component, because in a richer society, you need more resources in order to achieve certain capabilities. So I like this one. But this was my comment on this poverty line. But the important thing that I remember from this presentation is that we have a lot of poverty line. We have a lot of different choices, different choices. And in the presentation, Khalid made clear that depending on the choice of the poverty line, the conclusion that you may reach may be different. And then it comes to my favorite thing, stochastic dominance. If you are facing a situation where changing the poverty line may change your result, then the result is contingent on this choice. But in some cases, it is not contingent on this choice. So you may want to, in future research, test for these stochastic dominance. What are these results that are robust to the choice, the analytical choice that I've made? And since you have looked at both absolute and relative concept, you may want to adapt Jean-Yves Duclos' 2009 paper on pro-poor dominance condition. You need to tweak a little bit the dominance condition of this paper because it was linked with the average income and you want to link it with the quantile, the median. But I think it will be important. And let me look at this graph. And when I saw this graph, I said, this is the important graph. So, and Khalid commented on it, saying the status of the Middle East and North Africa region compared to the rest of the world depend on the choice of the poverty line. But then it depends, depending on which part of the world we're looking, and if we look at the graph, it depends on the choice. But if we go for the bottom poverty line up to a certain threshold, then the ranking is relatively robust. And then it brings us to this idea of a plateau that they have in the paper. So the plateau can be considered as a maximum poverty line in the actual development of the world. And then you choose this plateau or whatever other plateau to set the maximum poverty line below which you test for dominance. A last thing that I want to point out is that at some point, I know I'm focusing on some details, but some of these details are interesting. The evolution of poverty depends on the choice of the poverty line. And then you look what happens if you are with a low poverty line, 1.9. Then if I remember well, then there was an upper trend. But if you choose the upper poverty line, then there is a downward trend. There is an interesting result. So when we get old, we refer sometimes to old papers. In a 2000 Econometrica paper from Davidson and Duclos that says that what happens in the real bottom of the distribution if you increase the order of dominance. And what does it mean? If you increase your aversion to inequality, then you will get a dominant result with what is happening only in the bottom of the distribution if it's significant. So this idea that the trends are reversed, so you may want to test for second order dominance, and then maybe the trend are not reversed and you have an upward trend in poverty in the Arab region. I don't know, but you need to look at the data. Then let me switch to the two other papers. So I grouped these two papers together because they are different, but in both cases, they're trying to model what do we do when we don't have data. And the Middle East, North Africa region is the perfect region for what do we do when we don't have data or when data exists and the statistical agency don't give you access to data. I think this is important work. And so measuring poverty and developing poverty policies needs to be based on evidences. And for evidences, you need data. And typically, the countries for which the poverty reduction policies are the more important are the countries where data are less available. But typically it's linked with the level of development, except in the Middle East and North Africa. where the statistical capacity is well below for most countries than the level of development. There is an interesting paper that was published recently that links this lack of data transparency with the loss of 7 to 14% of GDP in the region since 2005. So there is a cost associated with lack of transparency on data. So I've used the World Bank data on statistical capacity, and when it's green and dark green, it means that statistical capacity is okay. And when it's red, it means there is an issue. When it's gray, so we don't know. And if you look at this map of the world, forget the US and Europe, they have data there, so it was not intended for those countries. But look at Africa and Asia and South America, and look at the red spots. And if you look carefully, the red spots are in the MENA region, or the importance of the red spots, which is bad statistical capacities in the MENA region. Of course, you can see that Egypt is an outlier, so there is statistical capacity in Egypt. But if you look at other countries around, this is not necessarily true. So now let me look at these two papers in details, and I'm commenting on the idea of the paper, not on the detail of the statistical technique. So the first paper, and this is a technique that this is not what I do, so I'm not comfortable, so I will not go in details, but the idea is that they're trying to answer this question of what is the pass-through of growth to poverty reduction, or to in the increase of the real consumption capacity of citizens. And this idea is that poverty reduction typically, and it has been, the analysis has been focusing on this for decades now, can be decomposed into the growth effects. So poverty can be reduced by growth, or inequality can be reduced by growth. And then there is a redistribution effect. In this kind of modeling, and I like this graph because this is what is happening in the world, we were sold this story that it's important to have this wave that will lift all boats in the 1980s. And of course, after decades, we know that it doesn't work. So all these policy recommendations, they've created the mess that we are in today. Since you have modeled how growth can, the pass-through of growth to poverty reduction, so this idea is that you have an approximative shape of the Lorenz curve with a group of countries that you're using to estimate this pass-through. Theoretically, this is what you do. I think that in future area, we should try to start to understand what would be the policy that will change the shape of the Lorenz curve. And this will be important to model. I don't have any answer, just thinking in which direction we should go. And now on the last paper that looks at the concentration of wealth. So the author uses Credit Suisse and parametric estimation, not of the income distribution. I wrote income distribution, it's wealth distribution. He says that there is a little consensus on the parametric form, but there are many that are used in the literature because of the lack of statistics that he has. He opts for the log normal because the choice that he faces is reduced. Just a comment on this. I'm not sure, because I'm not a statistician or a theoretical econometrician, but I think this needs to be checked. I didn't take the time to check it, but I think, if I'm right, that there is a result that says that the upper tail of the distribution converges to a generalized Pareto class. So there is a strong argument here for using, if you're interested in the top of the distribution, a Pareto. And since you're interested in identifying the resources that you can tax to fight poverty, I think this will be an interesting choice, but I'm not sure here. And then a detail in the paper. At some point, you're talking about how does wealth changes in different quantile. You look at the top, and then you look at the median, and you says that and this is a detail, sorry, but it's a detail that I like. So the median fall by 28%, and then the bottom 50% falls by 32%. So the median is the point that falls by 28%, and then if you take the average of what is happening between 0 and it's not and the median is 0.5, there is an additional 0 on my integral. Sorry for the typo. If you look at the average of what is happening in this part, it falls by 32%. Then it means that in some places of the quantile function, it falls more than 28%. So I would probably, if it's possible to report at least 1 or 2 additional quantile point, I think it will be interesting. Because probably what is happening in the bottom, but then of course it's dependent on the parametric form. And for this exercise, stick with the log normal because it's the bottom of the distribution.
Thanks.
It will be important. This is all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Paul Magdisi. Thanks everyone. So we have 5 minutes left actually, and it's not enough to do justice to open up for a serious conversation by all the participants. But I see that the panelists have also been responding to the questions online. Let me actually just ask Dr. Khalid, since, to provide some opening comments and try to address some of the remaining comments also. So we have 4 minutes before we close, Dr. Khalid. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Asad. Thank you so much, Dr. May and Dr. Paul. Dr. Paul, of course, is a friend and a long time associate with ESQA. These are very valuable comments, and I would highly appreciate if you can send the comments to us, your presentations. And I really do appreciate your suggestions for running stochastic dominance, weather confidence intervals. All of these are very valuable. In fact, this is still work in progress. We have, of course, reached a certain advanced level of our research, but the papers themselves are being finalized. And this is precisely why we wanted to have this conversation, because we wanted to get this very valuable feedback. Now, we can get lost in the details, or in my final remarks, focus on the big picture. I would like to focus on the big picture, and I would like to address 2 central issues here. First of all, why are we doing this, and really what is the main purpose of it? We want to go back to the policies, right? We want to go back to countries and tell them this is what you can do. But if you want to tell them something to do, you really have to have a better understanding of the real shape of the distribution. And in this case, as Paul said, the distribution, who knows what the real distribution looks like? But if we can, for example, think of a spillover effect of all of this research. Let's say that with all of this additional information that we have about the missing growth that is accrued by the top, or the missing part of the story that comes from all of the wealth inequality, we can adjust the Lorenz curve so that we have a better idea of what the real Gini that looks like when you account for that missing top income. Think about that real better Gini, and then building your narrative on it, and then going to countries and saying, you know what, if you focus on distribution policies as much as growth, and there's need not be a trade-off here, but in some countries, maybe you need to do more on one than on the other. Then I think we have a better policy dialogue. One last comment on why wealth inequality, and thank you, Dr. Mona, for raising this issue. Why is it a measurement issue? And also May raise this as well. Is it a measurement issue, or is there something really happening here? It might be, and this is actually also the regional story, it might be that because a lot of the wealth composition, the portfolio of the wealth is tied to the stock market evolution. It might be that a lot of this is because of real estate revaluations that are happening at a global, or stock market revaluations. So the dip in 2019 might be due to the slight crash in the December 2018 crash of the global stock market, and then the picking up that happened in 2020 towards the end of it, as Vlad said. These are my very quick comments, and I wish we had more time to get into the details. But back to you, Asad, and thank you again for your
Thanks.
wonderful moderation. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks to everyone actually for the presentations, for the discussions, and for the questions online. So very briefly, this is a fascinating topic. It's a topic of my personal interest also, and thinking together collectively about how to maximize the impact of growth on poverty is absolutely fundamental. We all know that inequality is a huge problem, and that takes away from that growth impact and limits the pass-through. And how do we actually address that and maximize that is something that is highly relevant. But in the world that we live in, even before we talk about how to maximize impact of growth on poverty, we have to see how we maximize growth itself, and how do you then make that growth as inclusive as we can, because in the current turbulent world that we live in, with the softening of growth, the recovery that was taking place in many countries, I think trying to get growth, particularly growth that helps create jobs for young people and for women, is absolutely paramount if we have to make any long-term impact on poverty and inequality. So with that, let me actually end and thank everyone, and thank ERF for organizing this panel, for giving me a chance to moderate and to help connect with friends on this session. Thank you very much, and have a very good day.